Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole public meeting for February 4th, 2025 to order. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin homelands. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin nations for their stewardship of these lands. I would now like to ask if anyone has an interest to declare to please do so now. Seeing none, I will now call for a mover to approve the agenda. Trustee Forte, does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries. Moving on to the briefing from the chair of the board. Chair Scott, can you please provide your briefing?
Thank you and good evening. Report cards will be available next week. Secondary students will receive their report cards on Tuesday, February the 11th, and elementary students will get theirs on Wednesday, February the 12th. Please reach out to your school if you require any assistance with this. I would also like to highlight a few more important upcoming dates. On February the 13th, OCDSB's Learning Support Services is hosting an in-person transition planning fair for families, caregivers, and youth with intellectual disabilities. February the 14th is a professional activity day for elementary and secondary schools. There will be no school for students, and the early on centers will be closed. And also a reminder that February the 17th, a Monday, is Family Day holiday, and all OCDSB schools, including early learning and childcare programs and administrative buildings, will be closed. Finally, an important reminder that Toonie Tuesday is on February the 25th, 2025. We encourage those who can to donate to the Education Foundation of Ottawa and support OCDSB students. Let's unite to make a difference. More details are available on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Are there any questions for the chair at this time? Seeing none, we will move on to the briefing from the director. Director, please provide your briefing.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, good evening. I'm delighted to announce a significant milestone for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. Yesterday, the 3rd of February, 2025, the OCDSB officially launched its first Inuktitut language course at Ottawa Technical Secondary School. The launch event was a vibrant celebration of culture and community, and I was privileged to be part of it. This initiative is a crucial step in our ongoing commitment to Indigenous language revitalization, educational equity, and reconciliation. It demonstrates the district's dedication to ensuring the vitality of Indigenous languages, ways of knowing and learning. Please visit our website for more details. Next, I encourage everyone to share your feedback on the proposed elementary program review. There are many ways to share your voice, both in person and online. Our online survey is open until March 25th, 2025. Community meetings will be taking place on March 6th, 17th, and 24th. To learn more about these sessions and to participate, visit Engage OCDSB. Details are also available on our website. Finally, I hope that everyone is enjoying the redesigned district websites. A big thank you and congratulations to OCDSB staff, including General Manager of Communications Diane Pernari, for their fantastic new look and the seamless transition. That ends my briefing for today.
All right, thank you, Director. Are there any questions for the Director at this time? Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I just wanted to ask the Director to follow up on the issue of the new designed webpage. I had asked at a previous meeting whether or not we would remove X and Facebook from the homepage, and I was told that we only use those sites in order to watch what's happening, but not to actively engage. However, it's been kept on our website as a Connect with Us banner, and given the harm caused to the Jewish community as well as trans people around the world, as well as others by X, I've asked Again, why that remains. Limestone District School Board, Durham District School Board, York Catholic District School Board, and others have backed away from using X. And there's a social responsibility aspect of our strategic plan that includes respect for all communities.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn over to Executive Officer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe the same question was asked at the last meeting and the meeting before that. The answer continues to be the same, which is that we use X at the district in order to notify parents of particular alerts and so forth. We do not engage, and by engage, we're using the social media term engage, which means to comment and like and so forth and retweet and that type of engagement. But we certainly do use it to notify our parent community about significant, important matters, because many of our parents continue to use X, and that is an effective way to engage with them in that manner.
So to follow up, I want to know if you're forcing our hand to then have a motion put forward in order to have the OCDSB step away from X because of the harm it caused to the Jewish community and to trans people and to others.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, for the perspective, the concerns you've raised. I think one of the things that we'll take back as staff, as our Executive Officer Mark clarified, the difference between a monitoring tool and a tool that's used more proactively. We'll take that back as staff and look for ways. We know we've migrated to a new website to continue to monitor, because there are some elements that help us as a district, at least with a sense of what's taking place more broadly in society, but also minimize the proactive outreach. There are some times when it is, as Executive Officer Mark has indicated, one of the tools to reach our parents, but we'll give some thought to the commentary and bring this back for further consideration later time. We know we've just migrated over to a new platform, so some of the things we're still working our way through.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. I'm seeing no other hands for questions for the director. So we have no delegations this evening, so we will now introduce report 25-001 school calendar year, and I will hand it over to the director.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn this over to Associate Director Reynolds and extend my thanks to himself and staff for working through the school year calendar for the upcoming school year. Hard to believe we are there already.
Our pleasure. For you, Madam Chair, I'm pleased to share with you a proposed calendar for the 25-26 school year. You may recall from previous years that it is every time at this year that we bring a proposed calendar to you. We need to have our approved version approved at board to the minister or the ministry by the beginning of March. And so that's why it's here now. As always, we take into account the requirements within Regulation 304 and those that are within our own procedure as well. We consult with a committee that is comprised of different employee reps, folks from key departments, parent and student reps as well. And we try to follow as best we can the model calendar that is put up at the ministry, which this one does. So there are essentially three calendars here for your contemplation. There is an elementary, a secondary semestered, and a secondary year-long. They all share the same start and end dates as well as key holiday dates. We have consulted with the other coterminous boards. We are sharing the same holiday dates, although some of the start and end dates differ, especially with some of the French language boards. We also try to align our PA days as best as possible with the Ottawa Catholic School Board, as we do share transportation through the consortium. And we were able to achieve some alignment there, as well as greater alignment between our own schools, K-8 and 9-12, in order to try to reduce some of those transportation costs and pressures that we've been experiencing over the last few years. There's nothing particularly unusual in these schedules. They also contain the 10 examination dates, which we use for a combination of examinations, final assessments, and student success activities, as we've done for the last couple of years. So I'm happy to answer any questions or try to bring any greater clarity where some is required.
All right, thank you very much. We have a speakers list started, so we have Trustee Lara.
Hello, thank you. So a couple of years ago, there was a board, I believe in Eastern Ontario, that piloted a 4-day school week for a number of schools. The ministry came up quite hard and was like, absolutely not. With a new minister, has there been any indication that school boards would be able to pilot 4-day school weeks again?
Thank you for the question. And we ourselves have tried to propose some different unique scheduling opportunities over the last couple of years. But the regulation is still quite clear that if you shorten the number of in-person instructional days, you need to add them on at some point to the year. And we also have commitments in our collective agreements, a few of them, that the school year is no longer, or the work year is essentially no longer than the 194 days. So in order to create more board holidays, essentially is what those would be, we'd also have to be creating more instructional days in other places. And so, no, nothing new has been signaled by the ministry that would allow us to be, take a different approach outside of what's currently in the regulation.
All right. Pity. I will happily move the recommendation as outlined in the report.
All right, thank you, trustee Lyra. Would you like introduction?
We need a calendar. This one seems like a good one. I would encourage all of my colleagues to support this one.
All right, thank you, trustee Lyra. Are there any additional questions? Stephen, please go ahead.
Thank you. And through you, I just wanted to bring up this issue that is occurring for the first time, and that is that our PD Day, Federation PD Day, is on a Monday as opposed to a Friday, which is problematic only because I know from the secondary perspective that the schools they're using will have to be staffed with custodial staff on the Sunday for them to set up, because that's what they've done on Thursdays in previous years. And that's what we've done as well. When we've had our in-person days at the Shaw Center, we have worked most of the Thursday setting up and then having our day on the Friday. So that's causing a bit of an issue for us, and costs, there will be costs, obviously, for custodial staff to open those locations, as Steph Kirky had pointed out to me, and will be for us as well, as we obviously look into possibly moving to a model similar perhaps to OSSTF, where we use facilities here in the board through community use of schools. So I just throw that out there. It is a concern for us, and certainly our own office staff too will have to be working on the day before. It's the only way, if we're using a venue, any venue outside of our own office, which we could never use for a PD Day. It's not possibly big enough for our 3,500 members. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, through you, Chair. So as part of this process, when we did consult with the our coterminous board, and they indicated these were the PD days that they were going to go with, and we were left with the decision whether or not we tried to match or not. And we did try to match. We did share the date in advance with the people on the committee, which included Federation reps, although we just shared it as a date. We didn't specify what day of the week. And I guess that went unnoticed that it was a Monday before, we got the indications that everything was fine with the date in and of itself. After hearing the concerns, we did follow back up with Austin to try to get a handle specifically on what would be the impact of moving off that one Monday. And it would be a cost to the OCDSB of about $97,000, which we consider to be a fairly significant savings, understanding that it does pose a bit of a hardship, and there may have to be staff in schools to let folks set up. Speaking, of the secondary PD day, I would assume that none of that setup occurred during the instructional day in those schools, and already would have had to happen on community use of school time the Thursday evening, and not during the Thursday day. And if that did happen, that's a practice we'd have to change, because we can't have any disruptions to student learning in schools. So we can work with the federations around having access to our properties, but if we don't mind, that additional expense, we can contemplate moving the PD day back to the Friday before.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just wondering what the approximate cost would be. I'm not sure of the number of sites that OSSTF uses for their PD day, but what would be the approximate cost of having staff in maybe 8 or 9 sites on a Sunday?
I feel we're almost having a cross-table conversation, but I don't have an answer to that at this time. I'd have to look into that.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Staff will bring that answer back and be able to report back to you. Going down my speakers list, I have trustee Scott.
Thank you. Just for clarity, a couple of questions. On the calendars, their last 2 days in June are X and X. Are those counted as instructional days or not counted as instructional days? Or what is the status and what is the meaning of X?
Thank you, and have been clarified that. So the last day of the school year is the 26th of June. The X's were just put in those 2 boxes to indicate that they were, although they followed what was the last day, that they weren't being used. On the calendar that we published to the community, those dates won't appear. This is just a working template from the ministry. But the last day of the school year will be the 26th of June.
Thank you for that clarification. The other question I had related to the professional activity days, it seems to me that with the ministry dictating so much of the content for the professional activity days, and the fact that particularly for elementary, some of the professional activity days are not there for professional learning on the part of the staff, but for report card preparation and other necessary work that teachers have to do. Has any thought been given, or has there been any indication at all that the ministry would consider either releasing some more of the professional activity days so we could do what was important for our own staff as opposed to what was the ministry's priority? Or alternatively, to changing the calendar to allow for additional professional activity days?
Thank you, through you, Chair. There's a couple of pieces to that one. Just to give further background to folks who may not know. So we're to use 3 PD days for ministry priorities, and we're allowed to create an additional 4 district priority days. But as you indicated, a number of those are already spoken to through various arrangements we have with different bargaining units for other pieces of work to be done. There is some time in there for PD. The district does, the ministry does provide a number of priorities annually, and they often are fairly broad and do somewhat align with our own priorities, such as literacy, numeracy, student well-being. So there is some alignment there, but that certainly is a concern that we weren't having enough time to do district-specific professional development. The regulation does allow for example, creating additional PD days or early closings, for half days for the purpose of PD, provided that you add another instructional day somewhere, which would essentially mean, for example, if we pick 2 days to close early and then we had to add another day, we would move from the 194 days we have now to 195 working days in the school year calendar. And we have language in at least a couple of our collective agreements historically. I don't think they had contemplated that we would want to make this change, that the school year, the working year, was not to be any longer than 194 days. So it really does limit our option to do that. We did propose it without precedent or prejudice to see if we could, attempt it. But understandably, there was a reluctance to move away from the language that was in the collective agreement.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And my final question is, with the 10 exam days in secondary, what are the plans for the coming year in terms of instructional time for those students who are not writing exams?
Thank you. So for the 25-26 school year, we will continue to refine the plans that we have in this year. For this year, I believe the plan for June is much like what we had in January, which is essentially all students will have opportunities to come into the school. I'm seeing nods from the people who sent out that direction. So there's no intention to, significantly alter that for the upcoming school year. But as always, we continue to receive feedback from our schools and our community, and we'll make modification and changes where appropriate to ensure that everyone's needs are well met.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. Continuing down my speakers list, I have Jean next. Jean, sorry. Can you turn your microphone on, please?
Sorry about that. Through you, Madam Chair, it was just to circle back to the question from Stephen Scudigan regarding schools being available on Sundays, and many of our schools already have custodial staff in them because of existing permits through community use of schools. So it would not be an additional cost in many instances.
All right, thank you for the clarification. Continuing down my speakers list, Trustee Nash.
And thank you, Chair, and through you. I want to come back to the what Trustee Scott mentioned with regards to the exam or non-exam days, because I also still hear from parents about their concerns of not having exams for grade 9 and 10. So this will be the second year where we're proceeding in this fashion. At some point, will we be examining the results of that, if it's done what we wanted it to do, or if there has been some unintended consequences of this new policy?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I think we can make room for that conversation at another point. I haven't come to the table with the right folks who are prepared to really engage in that right now, but it doesn't mean that if it's not, if it's at the will of the board, we can find time to engage in that conversation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Nash. Are there any other speakers? I'm seeing none, so I'm going to ask Trustee Jenkins to take the chair, please, as I have a few questions.
Go ahead, please.
All right, thank you. So I have one comment I will say, and it's building off something that Trustee Scott previously mentioned. There is a wonderful legend that is on this calendar, but it does not define what EXMPA stands for. And I understand everyone in this room might understand that, but for anyone who's just stumbling upon this calendar or wants to look at it, they might not necessarily know. So it'd be great if we can define that in the legend. That's a comment. My question though is, I understand there was a wide consultation on the school year calendar, but can you just confirm that all of our advisory committees have seen and provided input on the calendar and flagged anything we might have missed?
Thank you, through you. I can confirm that not all of them have. The procedure does specify parents, students, and so we use PIC and we use Student Senate, I think, to receive our student person to consult with, and then the rest of the staff taken from various, with the help of the bargaining units, we select some staff, but it has not been our practice to consult beyond that, except in circumstances where we're looking at a calendar that deviates from the ministry model, in which case then we would consult quite broadly with the community. But in this year, we're not looking at doing so. And to the other point, granted on the legend, the calendar that we publish, both in card and on the website, does have a much more detailed and legend, and it's color coded. So this certainly isn't meant to answer all questions for all parents. But if anyone at home or listening has any questions, certainly that other page of the report, page 3, does help to edify what each one of those days may in fact be. Noted for next time.
Is that it? Back
That's
to you
it.
then.
Thank you. And I do see someone online has their hand raised, but I apologize, I can't see the name. So if you have your hand raised online, please go ahead. And we cannot hear you. You are on mute.
Thank you. It is Chris Walsh from OSSTF SSP, and I just want to loop around back to what, just to add some context to what Stephen had mentioned earlier. With regards to OSSTF, I know that the Monday PD is a concern as well, and just for the SSP bargaining unit in general, for the sheer volume of members that we have, we generally use one of the biggest, or try and use one of the biggest sites in the board. But I know that the secondary bargaining unit, the teacher and OTs, I think pretty much take up every other high school in the board. So notwithstanding what Principal Fulton Hill had mentioned about community use of schools, and I can't comment on what it would cost to staff those buildings on a Sunday, but I think that on the Federation Day, close to all the high schools do get used for OSSTF. So just to provide some perspective from the OSSTF members. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Would staff like to comment?
Appreciate the comment. I think as Associate Director Reynolds mentioned, the cost differential between a change in date and the shift to a Friday would be significant, irrespective of any additional custodial costs that might not already be present. With respect to other aspects, I think planning as far ahead in advance will help. I understand the comments shared, but in balance, considering some of the pressures the district's under, we felt it was at least a judicious position to take here to try and incur the cost savings to match as closely as we could with our coterminous boards, but appreciate the comments made, and we'll make sure there's facilities are available and as flexible as possible for the preparation in advance.
All right, thank you. And I am seeing no other hands for questions, so I'm handing it back to Trustee Lyra for wrap-up.
Thanks. No wrap up, good discussion. Do look forward to having that brought back to board, not just back to Stephen. I'd like to know what the cost differential is. But otherwise, that's all. Thanks.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'm now going to call the vote for the recommendation. Can I have the recommendation on the screen, please?
Do you need me to read it?
When it's on the screen. All right, Trustee Lyra, please take it away.
That the recommended school year calendar outlined in report 25-001 be submitted by the 1st of March, 2025 to the Ministry of Education for approval as the official 2025-2026 school year calendar for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board's elementary and secondary schools.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. I'm now going to call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much, everyone. We're moving on to reports from statutory and other committees, and I will now call for a mover to receive the report of the Indigenous Education Council dated November 21st, 2024. Trustee Dixon, are there any errors or omissions in this report? Seeing none, I will now call the vote to receive the report. All those in favor? And that carries. I will now call for a mover to receive the report of the Advisory Committee on Equity dated December 18th, 2024. Trustee Scott, are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I will now call the vote to receive the report. All those in favor? And that carries. Now we're moving on to matters for discussion, and I will call upon the director to introduce report 25-003, Student Learning Update and Core Academic Skills.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I know the team is getting mobilized to join us at the table. I'll turn it over to Associate Director Reynolds just to introduce really the first of the 3 student learning related updates for the district for the current school year.
Before we hand it over to the Associate Director, do we need a few moments to find spots, everyone, or is everyone at the table? I believe we're good to go. Please take it away, Associate Director.
Thank you. I was worried there that a few people might try to sit elsewhere other than at the table. It was looking that way. Really, I'm just going to turn everything over to Superintendent Laverne. He and his team, and also the team in Reed, have really led the work on this report, and I think they've done an admirable job. And I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation and the discussion. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and it's wonderful to be with you this evening and to have the opportunity to have this conversation. This is the first of 3 student learning updates that we'll be bringing to you this year. We've aligned our student learning updates to follow along with the ministry's student achievement plan categories. So the first one is on core academic skills, specifically looking at literacy and math. The second will be on wellness. That will be coming in a couple of months. And then a month or so after that, preparedness and pathways. We're going to provide a rather high-level overview of the different pieces that are embedded within the LOT, and then open it up for discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rahim to start us off.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Before we get into the data this evening, which you all know is my favorite part, there are a few key pieces that I want to highlight just for everyone to keep in mind as we're chatting through some of the information in this report. When we talk about the data that we use to monitor student achievement, I really want to highlight that we talk about data at the district level, at the school level, classroom level, and at the student level. And so even though the data report attached in the appendix is reporting on district-wide achievement data for students, really where the magic happens is at the student level and at the classroom level. And I hope that through our conversations tonight, you'll get to see some of that in the work that's happening through our program services department and the data that's being used by educators to inform progress in their classroom. And that we do through a data support model where we help educators and school administrators use this data in their schools. And I also want to acknowledge some of the work that we've been doing with Heather Krause and the group at We All Count, really applying an equity framework to the approach that we take to the data. And a key piece of that is breaking the data into manageable, meaningful chunks to have in-depth conversations, which can sometimes be a little bit challenging because here we are talking about student achievement data, where a month from now, we're going to be having a conversation around student engagement and well-being. And it's really hard to tease those two things apart. So I just want to acknowledge the interconnectedness of those reports, that even though we're trying to bring them in pieces to have in-depth conversations, they are part of a bigger picture. So looking ahead to our EQAO results, we'll start with literacy. 87% of OCDSB students were successful on the secondary literacy test, a 2% higher success rate than was seen province-wide. Elementary reading and writing scores were either on par or slightly less than the province. Although grade 3 and 6 reading and writing have experienced slight declines, those are reflected in the provincial trends as well. When we look at our math results, for both elementary and secondary, the percentages of students meeting or exceeding the provincial standard is 1 to 2% above the provincial scores in grade 3, 6, and 9. Compared to last year, these results are quite stable, with the exception of a 1% increase in both are in grade 3 for both the OCDSB and the province. Now, an important analysis of our achievement data is the disaggregation for our identified groups. And this is done to monitor our progress and to inform our next steps as we work to reduce those disproportionalities for underserved students. And reporting this disaggregated data is done in two ways. So we do it with two different data sources. One is our population level data from our student information system, the other being the self-reported identity data from our Valuing Voices survey that we conducted in the spring. Based on those demographic characteristics for which we have population data for and greater coverage, that's from our student information system. That includes students who identify as Indigenous, students residing in low-income neighborhoods, multilingual learners, and students with special education needs. And for the purpose of this report, when we talk about students with special education needs, that's excluding students who are identified as gifted, and that's any student who has an individualized education plan or who has been identified through the IPRC process. When we disaggregate this data, we see that students with special education needs, excluding gifted, are less likely to be successful on EQAO assessments when compared to all students at the OCDSB, but they do outperform their provincial counterparts. Students who identify as Indigenous are less likely to be successful on EQAO. Compared to the province and compared to previous years, we do see mixed results, perhaps due to the smaller number of this group, leading to fluctuations over time. I also want to acknowledge conversations that I've been having about this data with some of our community partners and hearing from our Indigenous community some concerns around using EQAO as the tool for monitoring assessment. And so acknowledging that this is one tool that we use to monitor student achievement, in particular at the student level, how we round this out with many other sources of data, which program services we'll talk about shortly. Oh, sorry. Before passing it over to Reg, I do want to also touch on students residing in low-income neighborhoods. We don't have the ability to draw provincial comparisons for this data because we do calculate this internally based on custom data that we get from Statistics Canada on our students' postal codes. When doing this analysis, we do see that these students are also less likely to meet the provincial standard on EQAO. And an important area for future work is support for our multilingual learners. We are seeing disproportionalities there, both compared to all students and compared to their provincial counterparts. But I do want to highlight that we are doing additional analysis in this area, in particular, looking more closely and more nuanced at this data based on English language proficiency of these students. So although when we're looking at multilingual learners as a whole, we are seeing some differences, we do recognize that there's additional analysis for us to do that lets us be more precise in our strategies for supporting these students moving forward.
So as I've mentioned a couple of times when I've had the privilege of sitting at the table and speaking with you, we in recent years have gained access to better tools that allow us to more precisely identify student learning needs and consequently more precisely connect the appropriate instructional and learning strategies to those pieces. And that has led within program services, although this framework also guides the school priority learning planning that we do across the district as well, to our using this tight framework that guides the development of our professional learning. Yes, our professional learning. So we start with looking at the learning need, and that's where those tools are coming in to give us much more precise data so that we're able to really focus in on what is the learning need for the individual students or the small groups of students or large groups of students. Then we move towards the actions, and there we're looking at explicitly what specific action is going to work best for this student. And you can see that there's a list of considerations that we explore when we're determining the right actions, that we're not just jumping to the first one that comes to mind, but really making sure we're selecting the right action. And then extremely importantly, landing on impact. So the question we ask is, how do we know? How do we know this made a difference for students? How do we know that this has evolved and expanded staff practice in this area? And our learning from that impact tends to then inform our next learning need. So you will have noticed this during when you read the LOT, and you'll hear a little bit of this tonight as well, that when we are looking at, when we are talking about learning and our approach to learning across the district, we are very much focusing on what's the learning need, what are we doing about it, and how do we know it made a difference?
Thank you. For the last 4 months, we've been engaged in the important work of the Math Achievement Action Plan. And as indicated in the report, there are a number of actions that we took to boost math learning across the district. I want to just highlight 3 specific actions where we are yielding quite great results. So we've expanded our math networks, and we're building teacher knowledge and improving instruction. And this has been leading to more hands-on, collaborative, student-centered classrooms. This has resulted in increased student confidence, engagement, and learning. Consistent progress monitoring has been a pivotal piece of the work that we've been doing. And this year we introduced the ONAT, the OCDSB numeracy assessment tool. And we've been working with teachers to help them adjust their instruction in real time based on that important data, giving the students the help they need right when they need it. That has been making a difference. Lastly, our 14 math coaches, they've been working side by side with teachers to fine-tune their instruction and directly support student learning. Teachers are feeling more supported, and student learning is improving. So by investing in these 3 key things, teacher learning, using data effectively, and providing coaching support, we're seeing stronger math instruction and real gains for students. We can see that these are making a difference for our students and teachers. Happy to take questions.
And finally, before we get into the other piece, if we could just throw that slide back on for me, that would be fantastic. Thank you. From a literacy perspective, a major initiative this year has been early reading screening. And although that is currently a mandate by the province, I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge that the OCDSB began reading screening a number of years ago under the leadership of Principal Smith when we brought Dibbles in. And we're currently using Acadience as an online tool. But we have been engaged for a number of years now with reading screening. And so engaging in what is now a ministry mandate was actually a very smooth transition for our district because of the work that had been done previously. Those screeners have given us a lot of information to target specific supports for students, which leads to the reading intervention teachers. So we have a number of reading intervention teachers that are going into schools, and they will go into all of our elementary schools through various cycles throughout the year and provide direct support to individual students and small groups of students as well. An ancillary benefit of that is that classroom teachers are also observing what the reading intervention teachers are doing. And so that is indirectly creating some coach support as well for classroom teachers in that way. And then our instructional coaches are also going in, and we've used our data from Acadians to determine which schools we wish to prioritize. And then there's a meeting actually with the principal, assistant principal Kavanaugh, and the teachers in the classes that the coaches will be going into as well, to take a look at which classes, which students are in need of support, and what is the learning need. And the coaches are co-teaching and co-planning with the teachers, again, as we work to continue to expand and apply new learnings to better support students. So I think at this point, we will turn it over to questions and discussion.
All right, thank you very much, staff, and thank you for all the hard work. I have a speakers list started, so we'll start with Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for this report. I would like to see more of the specifics in terms of the disparities so that we can understand better when we lump together Indigenous students, students with special needs, multilingual learners and others. We're not really actually getting enough data here to understand who's being most profoundly affected. And my concern is that we're actually below the provincial standard for reading and writing. We are just squeaking by in grades 6 and 9 with a 52%, 55% of students meeting provincial standards in terms of math. So I hear that we have now better tools to identify student learning needs, but I'm not seeing that we're really figuring out what to do to make a dent in the learning disparities. And to the question, like, what are we doing and how do we know it's making a difference? What are we going to do about only 52% of students? And sure, Ontario itself is doing very poorly, but what are we going to do about students who are so lagging behind in reading, writing, and math? And thinking about our elementary program review, what are we going to truly put into place in order to meaningfully address these disparities?
Through you, Chair, I'll pass the what are we going to do about it over to Dr. Laverne in a second, but I did just want to acknowledge that the tables with the full disproportionality indices are attached at the end of the report. So if you scroll all the way down to the last 4 or 5 pages, the indices would all be linked at the end of the data report. So I'm happy to go through those with you.
Just to clarify, are they in an appendice for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they're in the appendices. So it has the full breakdown for all of the identified groups and the disproportionality calculations. Thank you. I'll pass it over to Dr. Laverne.
Thank you for that question. It's a perfect question, and it's a question that we constantly are thinking about in the work that we're doing as well. An example that I can give you would be in supporting students in our English language development classes. So these are students who have come to us. They need support in learning to speak English. They, for the most part, have not had formal education prior to joining us. So with those classes, we've done a couple of things. In the last year and a half, the team has provided a series of learnings on the components of structured literacy, what those pieces look like and what they look like within an ELD and ESL learning environment, to strengthen teacher capacity in being very precise with that information. That knowledge is very helpful, but by using the screeners, they're also able to identify where the students are in their learning progress and identify the specific gaps. They are beginning now to embed what we are coining as tight cycles in the classes. So they're using specific instructional strategies and then using different monitoring tools to identify whether or not that strategy worked. And that information is useful regardless of the outcome. If it didn't work, then we know that we need to change the strategy. And if it did work, then we're building upon the achievement that the student has just completed. So those cycles are helping us see that students are moving forward in their literacy. We haven't seen that realized within EQAO data yet. But we are seeing that in the observations from the instructional coaches and the teachers in the programs and from principals who are going into the programs and seeing the students accelerating their learning in those ways. I'll turn it over to Superintendent Major for some math.
Pardon me. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the question, and this is a critical issue, and it requires an intensive focus. We've been engaged in some of this work over the last 4 months. Firstly, it's a team approach is really required to ensure that we are taking a very comprehensive look at what we're doing. And so we have been collaborating with our learning support partners, with our ESL team, with our Indigenous team, equity and state team, to develop professional learning strategies and opportunities and resources that reflect an inclusive approach. So that's step number one. Step number two, culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy and universal design for learning strategies have been the grounding in the professional learning we've been providing for our educators. And this learning is very much focused around knowing the learner, making math accessible, making it relevant, and being responsive to student needs. We're starting off with the belief that all students are capable learners, and it's our job to create the conditions to ensure that they are successful. And so through the varied delivery models in terms of teaching strategies and the varied opportunities that teachers provide students in terms of how they represent their learning, to the ongoing direct support through whether it be small group support or individualized support, and that intensive progress monitoring, all of these pieces we've seen have been making a difference in terms of student learning. One of the additional areas of focus for us this year has been in terms of working with tools and visual aids to support student learning. Students are telling us directly that this is making a difference in terms of their learning. They are able to better understand the concepts that they're being exposed to through the conversations that they're having within the framework of the classrooms. They are developing those very strong reasoning skills and the ability to articulate the learning that they're engaging in. They've been telling us this has been making a difference. I'd end with one small anecdote. A couple of weeks ago, we were asked by the Ministry of Education to provide a presentation for all boards across the province on that third pillar of the Math Achievement Action Plan, that's knowing the learner. We connected with several of the schools, and they selected us because they said, we're seeing the examples of culturally relevant responsive pedagogy in action in your classes. We'd like for you to be talking about that at the presentation. So we connected with two of our area high schools, which have very diverse populations, including Indigenous students, multilingual learners, students from low-income neighborhoods, et cetera. And we not only had teachers and principals on the call, but we also had students. We had the voices of students. And one of the student voices that really stuck with me, the student said, in my class, we engage in a number of different routines, and they talked about using hands-on materials, and they talked about math conversations. But they said, sometimes I get really, really anxious when I'm in class, and I'm not always confident about what I'm doing. But my teacher, Mr. C, he has confidence in me. He believes in me, and that has made a difference.
And if I can just jump in for one final piece, I'd like to ask Superintendent Riddell to offer some comments as well. Superintendent Riddell is newly returned to our district as superintendent. She's superintendent for Indigenous education and can speak to some of the work that her team and all of us in collaboration are working to support Indigenous students.
Okay. Thank you through you, Madam Chair. So it's been great coming back to the district and certainly having the portfolio of Indigenous education. As Dr. Laverne and Superintendent Major have mentioned, there's been tremendous collaboration between program services, the Indigenous education, SAIT, equity, and learning support services. A lot of our work has been with program services, and we do have our Indigenous team members sitting at the table with people at the onset, working on key tasks, assessments, evaluations, and the like. And a key component of that, for example, they're working on grade 1 and 3 tool for students who are falling behind with EQAO in terms of EQAO data, but also with their reading proficiency. So a greater look at oral storytelling, and then works that are actually relevant and build relationships with our Indigenous students. Our Indigenous students, particularly when they are younger, really excel at the oral fluency and decoding. So looking at traditional ways of oral storytelling and starting that as a basis, certainly with our students who are behind or have lesser scores in the EQAO, it sparks that connection to identity as they are texts by Indigenous authors. It also fosters that sense of belonging, but most importantly, that relevance to them and their place on the land. So that is a work that is in progress now, and we certainly have the data through the Acadian screeners to look at students with whom we need to work with, and are working, really shoulder to shoulder with program services to do that. Certainly for math, there's been a lot of work. It is an area that is where the achievement is significantly lower. Tremendous work to do there as well with Superintendent Major and her team, looking at our schools where there is a greater proportion of Indigenous students, and really working not just with her team, but also our system principal, our principal at Urban Aboriginal, as well as some of our grad coaches to support Indigenous students in the acquisition of math. And again, shifting and looking at sharing circles within a math classroom, smaller group instruction, more land-based learning. And that is something that can be, I don't want to say easily, but something that we are working tremendously on, particularly for next year with all courses to help improve. But most importantly, one thing we're doing with our grad coaches who are in 3 of our schools is really looking deeply at the student achievement and looking at the pathways that kids are choosing, also what their credit accumulation is, where they're falling behind. For some students, it might mean a prior learning assessment recognition that we're doing with them based on their own lived experience that we can offer credits to them. We're also looking at authentic learning experiences for students. So certainly Indigenous students, as any student, but they have tremendous gifts that they bring. They do a lot in terms of their culture. So we're just starting to really look at that and ways that we can grant credits through authentic learning experience for students. Lots of other things are happening as well, but I know this conversation at this time next year, just in terms of data as an indicator, there will be improvement, but more importantly, a greater interconnectedness and sense of belonging for Indigenous students in the system.
Thank you. I thank you all for your responses, and I think it's, of course, extremely important that we have culturally relevant pedagogy and that we know the learner and that we make math relevant. However, I just go back to our data, and 31% of multilingual learners are not meeting provincial standards in terms of math, et cetera. Some 30% in terms of students with special needs. And actually, our numbers have gotten worse over the last couple of years, not better. So while all of this work that we're doing, coordinating with partners and inclusivity is so important, we are somehow not ensuring that our students are learning what they need to know in terms of math. So what are we going to do tangibly to address that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I really appreciate what Trustee Kaplan-Murphy is bringing forward. A couple of comments from my perspective, because I know in my head and my heart that staff, centrally staff in schools, our students are working as diligently as they can. It's clear to me that we need some strategic simplification of what we do in the teaching and learning environment. I think we're trying to cover more ground than we can effectively cover. A look back, and I've spoken to Superintendent Laverne, Superintendent Major, and staff about reviewing, regrouping, refreshing, renewing our approach to teaching and learning, our frameworks, on a couple of fronts. One is consistency of application system-wide, and I don't see it in my week-to-week school visits. I see a lot of pockets of what I would say are promising practices or best practices, but I don't always see a consistent approach, and that's something that is common in large, complex districts, but something we need to continue to work on, and I know both superintendents and other staff, senior staff are working on. The other one is a real honing in on what used to be called high yield practices, effective instructional practices that really make a difference, and really intentionally doing, framing, organizing our professional learning around that, and really doubling down on our professional learning sessions to reinforce those. The next comment I'm going to make is a little bit more challenging, but I do need to make it. One of the reasons many years ago that the district and the province moved forward when it came to achievement, year by year, 1 or 2% at a time, is that the Literacy and Numeracy Secretariat visited districts and told districts to stop doing 17 things. Here are the key 3 things you're going to do, but we're not going to provide you the funds to do the professional learning to do it. So they had a tremendous leverage point with them. That is very important for us to return to as a focus. We have diversified our focus. I'm not disputing that our intentions are solid. They are. But we do need to regroup for strategic simplification to get back to the heart of the kinds of comments in what's the learning need? What are we doing about it? How are we going to know we made a difference? I think you heard that from Superintendent Laverne this evening. So all to say, we've got a little bit of work to do centrally in our coordination. We've got to rely on the professional expertise of our staff to, as Superintendent Major said, to apply the learning in context where there's a need, but to hone in here. And I think that's what we're getting to in a lot of our central discussions, to try and corral us with finite resources, human, material, fiscal, to make sure we're implementing to the best of our ability those key strategies, and not a diluted set of wider strategies despite our best attempts that don't add up. And you've heard the conversation around the table at times. If you've got too many foci, you don't have any foci at all.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murphy. I have a speakers list started. So I have Trustee Lara, Trustee Dixon, and then Trustee Nash. Trustee Lara.
Thanks. So Trustee Kaplan-Murphy covered a lot of the ground I wanted to, particularly around the decreasing scores over the last couple of years, but I do have a couple of other questions. Do we have any cohort analysis of the group of students who have just taken it? Do we compare them to their grade 6 and their grade 3 years? And how do we use that data to inform us both on the impact that COVID might have had, or how we can support a particular group of students if we've seen a precipitous drop in one of their score sets?
So for the EQAO data specifically, we do not, because the EQAO assessment changed so significantly in the 20 to 2021 year to reestablish a new baseline. The assessment moved online. It became adaptive so that not all students were getting the same questions. And even EQAO was cautioning against making comparisons pre that new baseline. And so this coming year, students that are writing in grade 6, we have their grade 3 data for. So at the student level, we're able to share with principals, hey, this is how these students performed when they were in grade 3. Now they're going into grade 6. Same with grade 9. We just don't have their assessments yet. That'll be in next year's report.
Okay. My second branch of questions is, I guess, going to be for each of the people who spoke a moment ago, but all the good work that is going on. That is, what kind of numerical result are you expecting from the work that you have done or are planning to do? Are we expecting to see 10% more students with Indigenous backgrounds passing the math? Are we expecting to see 2% more students across the board? What kind of results do you expect the work that we are doing will show?
So I don't have a specific number to give you. I will say that we can expect, of course, greater fluctuations where numbers are smaller. One thing I will say is that I would expect the increases to be slow and steady. In particular with EQAO, we don't typically see jumps of 10, 12%. I would say one key area of focus, and I alluded to this at the beginning, is really about setting the conditions for learning. And before we start to see these changes in the achievement scores, we see changes in things like student attendance. When we look at the school climate surveys that we did in the spring and how promising they were compared to the previous round of school climate surveys, and seeing students feeling better well-being at school, greater sense of belonging, we're seeing attendance rates go up. Those are all of the things that I think will also, in addition to all of the great strategies that were talked about, lead to slow and steady increases in EQAO. But I think I'd be hesitant to say that we would expect jumps of 10 or 12%, just given the nature of the data.
Trustee Lara, before you continue, the director would also like to comment.
Through you, Madam Chair, I agree with our General Manager, Rahim. Just a couple of points to add as context. One, some of the work of assessment and evaluation experts like Douglas Reeves look at results in quartiles. For instance, in the highest quartile, if you think of 75% and above, two factors. One, it's very hard to make larger gains the closer you get to an absolute number like 100%, which is a challenge for achievability, but always something we strive for. And it's a different conversation when you're at 97.5% versus when you're at 52. So I think it's a valid point. The other point I wanted to make in terms of setting targets forward is that some of the strategies that move you from one quartile to another, from the third quartile to the fourth, are not necessarily the same strategies you'd utilize from moving from the third quartile into the fourth versus the second into the third. And often the conversation around the disaggregation speaks to, at that point in time, what's done with various subgroups of students to move the needle forward overall. So I think there's lots of dynamics to this, including the array of strategies you might use, the quartile that you happen to be in, the reality you're in. Of importance in my last comment, if your scores are swinging upwards 5, 10+%, could be a function of a small number of students that's drastically changing the dynamic, or validity and reliability issues with the actual assessment itself. So I think General Manager Rahim speaks to the fact that in a world that's stable in this area, we'd be making slow, steady progress every year, turning that needle forward and then attacking various elements of either subgroups or strategies to try and continue to move forward.
I appreciate what you have said about pushing the quartile strategies and the difficulty of getting from 97 to 100, but we're sitting at 55. So there's a lot of room for growth here. So I guess my question is, based on the work that we are doing, are we projecting 1% higher than this year, 2% higher than this year? I'm asking us to try and commit to a number to say this is where we think the work will get us. Because next year, if we come back and we're down another 2, I think we need to have a serious reevaluation of the work that we are engaging in, because evidently it's not working. And this is the evidence for the evidently. So I'll go with that question and see if there's a response to that, but come back to me.
Let staff have a go and add in if as needed.
I'd like to share a few comments. We've been working with schools around setting targets based on where students are at. So we've been really focused on measurable growth for students. The work with the ONAT has been really helpful in terms of that, because through the ONAT assessment, teachers are gathering some really critical information around where students, their areas of needs are and where their strengths are. and they are adjusting their instruction to support the area of need. We are in the process right now of collecting our middle of the year data for our ONAT assessments. And so far, the data that we've collected, we've been seeing an upward swing. We're noticing that students are, in terms of the measures that are being identified, we're definitely seeing student growth. And so that focus around measurable growth, progress monitoring, that is certainly making a difference. We're also really thinking about what's happening in regards to some of the EQAO data. The students, grade 9 students, have just completed those assessments, and we're trying to gather some information around what's happening in relation to that. I can only share the results of one school at this particular point in time. The principal called me up and he said, just want to share the information because we're noticing that what we're doing is making a difference. This is a school with students that a large number of them in the classes, the 2 math classes have been, they have previously had individualized education plans. Last year, their EQA results were, I think it was at 9% students reaching level 3. This semester, 39%. That's measurable growth. That's what we're focused on. Real-time data based on what's happening in classes. The conditions that Dr. Rahim talked about, creating those conditions for learning, is incredibly important in terms of the work that we're doing. That is going to make the difference in terms of student learning and understanding, and we're already seeing those incremental steps happening.
I can actually jump in from a literacy lens and very much in alignment to what Superintendent Major was just speaking about. We started yesterday the midterm rescreening of all of our students in year 2 kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2. So that we're going to be able to compare the benchmark data we had in September by school with the benchmark data we get now. So we'll be able to know, are we headed in the right direction? Are things working? Are we seeing an increase in that in student literacy achievement? Which doesn't get us to the EQAO number yet, but it tells us that we're headed in the right direction and things are working there. And even between those 2 formal assessment times, educators, coaches, reading intervention teachers, when they're working with students, are also using different progress monitoring tools. And based on the information that we've seen now, and again, we have preliminary data, so I wouldn't cast anything in stone just yet. But the progress monitoring data that we're seeing thus far is that when the students are engaged with the components of structured literacy in a very direct instructional approach, the students in a very short period of time are reaching the targets they should be reaching, and in many cases exceeding them. So we are seeing, I refer to them as directional arrows. They're telling us that we're heading in the right direction, and we're capturing these pieces of data very similar as to what math is doing along the way, so that we know things are heading in the right direction. And what I think is even better about this is that it's allowing us to intervene earlier. So we're not waiting until the next EQAO data report comes out. We are intervening earlier with those data pieces. The other piece that I did want to share with you, and I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Magner in a second. Dr. Magner is the General Manager in Program Services. And it has been an amazing gift in our department this year to help us in a lot of these different areas. But one of the questions that we started exploring, we were looking at our MLL data. And you've seen the data so that you know that there's a significant achievement gap in there. And our question was why? And we needed to do a bit more of a deeper data dive to understand that a little bit more and understand who it is we need to support more and how. So I'm going to ask her to speak to some of the work she's doing in that area.
Thank you. Dr. Rahim mentioned this earlier, but there has been some more nuanced analysis of our MLL data based on that identified gap that we have been noticing in the data. So we've really started to disaggregate based on MLL step data. When we look at the district level and roll up all of our MLL students, we can see a significant gap. But what we're noticing in some preliminary analysis is that once we disaggregate based on step levels, we are actually seeing significant achievement for our students who are at step 5 or step 6. We have 100% of those students are fully participating in the EQAO assessment. And in those cases, most of those students are actually outperforming the rest of students at the district level. So as a result of some of that analysis that we've started to do, we're starting to explore dig into our MLL data a little bit more, looking at how long students are in our ESL, ELD programming, as well as how long it's taking them to progress along that step continuum, because we know that they are successful once they achieve those higher levels of step. So we have been doing that, and in addition, looking at how we can be revising or refining the approaches that we're using to support those students based on what we're discovering.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate what has just been said about how we have other things to look at other than the EQAO data, as well as we might not see the results of this work for the next EQA, so it might be in the year after. So I guess my question is going to be, what numerical numbers can we expect in this year or the year after are we expecting to have this work result in? I'm looking for a number.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm going to jump in here for staff because this is part of the tension that is established when you do target set. There are pros and cons to that kind of a quantification, even as something you strive for, beyond what I mentioned in terms of approaching this at different quartiles and different contextual pieces. What I can say to Trustee Lyra is we appreciate the comment raised. We'll take those points back into consideration for us as a district. We want to make sure we don't turn the good work of effective practices into some obsession with a quantitative number, because it can overshadow the good work that needs to be done for some short-term gain at the expense of a longer-term approach. And there are ways to game any assessment, to superficially bump up numbers to achieve essentially what you're asking us for. So we'll take that back into perspective. I know you don't mean it that way, Trustee Lyra. Just want to make sure we don't send the wrong direction to the system, that this is just all about getting from 52 to 53, irrespective of the learning that should be taking place along the way. So it's duly noted by staff. We'll look at ways to bring a balance to the quantification and really qualification of the work we do, so that we keep that in a balance. I understand what Trustee Lyra you're getting at here is to strive for improvement. That's what we'll try to do in our upcoming plans.
To be clear, the reason I'm asking for a numerical commitment is because if a year from now we sit here and we're down another 2%, we need to have a serious look at the work that we are doing, because it's evidently not working. And so trying to pick a number and say, if we do not reach at least this target, then the work that we are doing is not achieving the results that we want. And then we need to reevaluate that work, because I don't want to go through another year, another 2 years, another 5 years of saying we're doing all this work. Look at all the work that we're doing. It's great. But then our numbers keep dropping without a serious reevaluation of the work that we're doing to combat those dropping numbers. So it's not about trying to game the system. It's not about trying to beat the Catholic board. It's not about trying to get a slightly higher number. It's about making sure that the work that we are doing is getting the results that we hope that it will get. I have very little time left, so I'm going to jump back on the list. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. So I'm just letting everyone know we have 10 first-time speakers on our list right now. So we're going to go to Trustee Dixon next, and then Trustee Nash.
Through you, Chair. I'm just going to follow up with the questions from both my colleagues here. I guess more to the director, and then if anybody else wants to sort of jump in, that would be great. Regarding the students' achievement and learning outcome, our districts continue to see persistent achievement gaps, particularly among historical marginalized students. Given your leadership over the past year, what target interventions have you implemented to improve the student outcome, and how will you measure their success?
Through you, Madam Chair, Trustee Dixon, you ask an important question, and I want to tie it to Trustee Lyra's final comments. We're having that serious introspective as a staff right now with the results we're having. And I can tell you from my meetings at the Council of Ontario Directors of Education, directors are having these meetings right now, because if you look across from the bolded numbers, you'll find a set of numbers that aren't bold either, and they're not headed in the right direction. Some of the conversations at a more systemic level, provincially, regionally, and locally here, is our focus as a district. How much time we're actually spending talking about learning, and how much time, quite frankly, we're putting out fires to things we can't control around this planet. So we really, really need to simplify strategically, to get back to the heart of our work, because our spreading of our wings so thin is clearly working against us. I will tell you, Trustee Dixon, I'm not satisfied with where we're at. And I don't think anyone around the table is. I do think we need to focus in on some of the groups that General Manager Rahim has spoken to for a relook at the nature of the supports we're providing. I do think, in spite of some of the wonderfulness of some of the partnerships we have going on, we have to take a closer look as to whether that's adding any value whatsoever to learning. I question a lot of it. I question a lot of what I see going on in the classroom. It's not bad. It's just not leading to learning. So we do need to hone back in on what will drive progress forward and learning and wellness. But I have to tell you all, that will come at the expense of some things we just say no to. So I think you ask an excellent question. It's the most important thing I do. All the rest doesn't compare with learning outcomes. That's the most important work I have to do and we have to do as a system. And again, coming back to the previous comment, I don't want to have that conversation a year from now. I want to have that conversation now. To be honest with you, I wanted to have that conversation last year. So we've got work to do as a system, and we've got to be as wise as we can on what strategies are moving us forward and what activities, actions, events, initiatives, projects simply aren't. So appreciate the question. It's at the crux of our work, but it's not a recipe and it's not a magic solution, or I'd be on tour.
Okay. Second question. Continue on that. With equity and inclusion education, ensuring equity in our schools require more than policy statements. It requires visual action and accountability. Can you provide specific examples of how your leadership has advanced equity within hiring practices and curriculum development and student support systems? How do you ensure that the equity is embedded across the level of decision-making?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll split that question up into two. The first part of it from a broader infrastructural perspective, the elementary program review. That is an infrastructural change that will bring equity of access, opportunity, experience, and outcomes to our students. That is very difficult work for us as a district. We're in the midst of it right now. I'm very pleased at the progress of the elementary program review to date. The sensibility and the reasonableness of people realizing this is what we need to do to set the right infrastructure so that our teachers can work within an environment that doesn't create further barriers around equity. When it comes to hiring practices, through employee services, we're working on a series of initiatives that both expand the diversity of not only our workforce to represent the faces of our students, but also our strategies for leadership development. And those are both works in progress. We have more to do to ensure that our leadership opportunities provide the right differentiation, openness to ensure we get a diversity of learners that will strengthen our organization, not the other way around. and that we have hiring practices that attract a wider variety of individuals to come to the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board to focus on achievement and well-being with an underpinning of equity, and not, quite frankly, other initiatives, projects, activities, or events. To really come here to work on learning and well-being. That's who we're looking to attract.
Okay, and then I'm gonna want to go on the speakers list for a second round. And then the third question is with community engagement and public confidence. There's a growing concern among families and key stakeholders about a lack of trust and confidence in the district's ability to address key issues, including students' achievement and transparency in decision-making. What steps have you taken to rebuild community confidence, and how do you plan to make engagement and families and the border communities more meaningful and effective?
For my third interview question, look, I think we've made a lot of progress we're in the midst of a consultation right now, which is very important. What I'm most pleased about that consultation is that we're not in some superfluous manner saying to communities, hey, tell us anything you think you'd like to have with a program review at elementary. We're not going to our communities in that light. We're putting a model on the table that we worked at length to try and have all the elements of equity of access and accessibility that we heard in the strategic planning process before I arrived. So I think one of the key points of that is genuine consultation, consulting on what we can get feedback in and actually not consulting on elements we can't. Things that are part of the ministerial direction, collectively bargained agreements, whatever it might be. So I think on that front, I can genuinely say we're consulting where we can, getting input from our advisory groups, our interest holders across the district. That's really, really important for the work of the program review, but being honest about the things we can't change. All to say, all of that is critical infrastructural change that creates the conditions Superintendent Major was talking about to allow our staff to do their good work. We feel we've got some centrally driven systemic issues to address. The elementary program review is just the most recent and common example, but to be honest, there's 3 other chapters to that vision exercise we need to get to that allow us to create the conditions for our staff to do their good work.
Do I have time for one more? Last question? I got a minute. Oh, yeah. Okay. So several families have shared concern that the only intentional effort is to address underachievement in our district is through the work of SATE. However, we recognize that SATE is not present in every school and has only a limited number of staff members. Given our achievement data, is it clear that it's clear that we need more target or support and not less? What specific actions are being taken this year to ensure that next year achievement data tells a different story for those students and their families? As a director, tell us how is the district planning to expand our strength efforts to support underperforming students more effectively?
So to begin, the SATE work isn't an initiative or a project, it's an inquiry. The point of an inquiry is to try some things, to learn from it, and then to apply the best practices. So we're going to be looking to take the SATE inquiry into a more systemic approach so that it doesn't remain tied to a small number of schools, but that we take the learning from that inquiry and we apply it across the system, especially at a time where we've got a window of opportunity. It's not an easy window of opportunity, but it's a window of opportunity because we need to remobilize our central supports based on some of the pressures we're facing, budgetary and other, including our progress. So we're looking to learn from what is a 3-year inquiry and to take those learnings, and it's not the only one, SATE's just one example, I think it's a great example to have brought up, to share more broadly across the system and apply those learnings. And if we experience something in the inquiry that didn't make a difference, To leave that aside, that's good learning too, and move on with the ones that we see or appear to see to be making a difference, to Superintendent Laverne's point, that's pointing us in the right direction.
Thank you, Director. I think I'll go on the other list because I think I'm running out of
Alright.
time. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dixon. So going down my speakers list, I have Trustee Nash, then Trustee Scott, then Trustee Forte. Trustee Nash?
Yes, and thank you, through Chair. I very much appreciated the questions that were asked by my fellow trustees, very important questions. I very much appreciated tonight's presentation. I am very encouraged, and I love the stories that Superintendent Major made, not stories, but the some of the experiences, and I feel very encouraged as to for seeing results in the coming years. I wanted to ask about a template that was part of the package. It's called the Student Priority Learning Plan Template. Is this something that's required by each principal to fill in for every student, or if you can provide a little bit of information on that and maybe go through it? Because I think if there are parents listening, which I'm sure there are, and caregivers, they want to know how is this exactly happening in their classroom. So I think that will give them indication as to what exactly is, how is their math or literacy different this year than previous years. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you for that question, and through you, Madam Chair. So the School Priority Learning Plan is a plan that every principal builds with a team of staff in their school to action key learnings in their school. So they would focus on literacy, they're going to focus on math, there's also a well-being piece in there as well, and they can optionally choose pathways focus as well. And what we have done is engaged principals in a framework that helps us lead the change. So they explore their data and various sources of evidence to identify a learning need in their school, and they identify a goal with that. So they would select a goal as the first piece. And the framework that you're referring to is actually to walk us through a bit of a process to make sure we're considering all the pieces along the way. They also identify a specific group of students who are in greatest need, who have also been historically underserved and continue to be underserved. And that's a significant change from, say, school improvement plans of 10, 15, 20 years ago, when the approach tended to be more whole school. We're asking principals now to focus in on the students that are in greatest need at this time. They also do an intentional connection to the roadmap, and that was put in place intentionally in the framework so that all of us were going to our roadmap and identifying how the roadmap is driving the work that's happening in the school as well. Once they've done those pieces, there's then a column where they start to identify the actions and steps that they're taking, the timelines that they're following to take those steps, and how they know that those steps are being implemented. And we ask that last question specifically to make sure that we're not going too big, that we're not operating purely from a place of hope, that we're being realistic. What's a realistic step in the next month? And principals review this every month, so they're adding 1 or 2 steps a month that they're going to take. Something that I've said to the principals many times when I've spoken to them is a 100% change is a series of 1% changes. That will take us to these shifts. So what reasonable steps are they taking? And they're supported in monthly principal meetings, in small groups with a number of superintendents, where we walk through with them and they do some sharing. What was their goal? They remind everybody in their group what their goal was, why that goal was important to them, what group of students are you focusing on, why that group of students. What steps did you take in the last month? And how do you know that those steps started to move things in the direction that you wanted it to make? And then they identify the next step or 2 they're going to take in the next month. The second tab of that, so that's sort of an ongoing, I'm going to say list, but I don't mean to make that sound like it's a checklist. It really is documenting the narrative and documenting the learning journey that the school is experiencing. And then from that, it's in a Google Sheet, so I call it tab 2. Tab 2 is the progress monitoring page, where principals are asked to identify how they're monitoring this progress. And they monitor it through evidence of student achievement, student well-being, the evolution of staff practice, changes and challenges to systems and structures, and parent and caregiver engagement. And 3 times a year, we ask them to do a snapshot of where they're at that point. Our cycle for this work runs November to November. So in November, when they were formalizing and refreshing their plan, they identified where they were at with their different data sources and pieces of evidence. Your timing for this question is perfect because in 2 weeks, we have all the principals together again. And our major focus on that day will be sitting down and talking about our February snapshot. What data are we looking for? How are we truly tracking that? Because sometimes, in fairness, I found myself doing this. I pick what I think is a really good source of evidence to monitor, and I have no way to actually track that. And so we're really going into to have some discussions with them about how are you really tracking that and making sure that they are able to identify sources of evidence that show them that we're heading in the right direction. And then we will do that again with them in May. So that we are, I think it's May, yes, so that we are doing a bit of a consolidation at the end of this school year to inform what we're starting with at the beginning of next year. So it really is, the chart was designed intentionally to walk all of us through a process of reflecting on our data and evidence, identifying a learning goal, identifying a group of students that we're focusing on, being explicit and specific with the steps we're taking, analyzing that we are taking those steps and that it is moving things forward, and then 3 times a year doing a snapshot to make sure that the work we're doing is actually realizing in the change that we seek. Did that help? That was a lot, sorry.
No, that was excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Trustee Nash. Trustee Scott?
Thank you. I'm going to take us in a different direction altogether for a minute. And that is looking at Appendix G, which is all about the summer programs. Because one thing I discovered when I read it was that there were some programs like SAIL, S-A-I-L, which I didn't recognize and didn't know what they were. And the other thing that I also noticed was that there were a number of programs where there was a significant difference between the number of total students and the estimated initial enrollment. And I wondered whether that was an estimating challenge or things were unexpectedly popular or things were unexpectedly unpopular in terms of families choosing them for their students.
Through you, Madam Chair, I will do my best with this. This is under Superintendent Amy Hanna's portfolio, and she and I had some conversations about these pieces. This is information that we bring forward to you annually. So I will give you the best information I have, and if there's more details that you're looking for, I'll follow up with Superintendent Hanna tomorrow and get back to you. So SAIL is an ESL, English as a Second Language Learning Support Program. We've been offering that in the district and through summer school for a series of years now, and it provides additional support and a bump up to students who are learning English and further supports the acceleration of their learning. So that's what that program speaks to. And again, we have been running that for a number of years now. In terms of the difference between the estimate and the total students, and I'm doing I'm taking my best guess at these pieces right now. Oftentimes for summer programming, from a staffing perspective, we have to anticipate how many students we're going to have because we actually have to staff it before we have the students registered in those areas. So that can be one factor that would come into play. The other factor can be that in the summer, there are times where students will sign up for a program and then within the first couple of days decide that this isn't what they were seeking, what they were looking for, or something else came up in that area as well. So those would be 2 factors that I think could influence the difference in those numbers.
Thank you very much for that. I'll follow up with Superintendent Hanna further. The second question brings me back into more of the discussion we were having before, because looking at Appendix C, and particularly looking at the disaggregated data from using the Valuing Voices data, increasingly, I have to ask myself if we are actually asking ourselves the right questions here. Because there is a certain amount of overlap among different groups. Low SES, for example, can apply to any group. And some groups we know in our society right now are more likely to be low SES. It doesn't mean that all of them are. So when we look at the achievement of a particular group, whichever identity piece we choose to examine, I'm not sure that we really are seeing what we need to know to help us adjust our programming to meet the needs of the neediest students in that particular group. I looked at the data for broken out by religion, for example. It was fascinating to see what great results those who had identified as agnostic and atheist were doing. It was quite astonishing that in some of the columns, those were the highest proportion of in terms of measuring achievement. But when I look at some of the other religions, it has nothing to do with religion, I suspect. It has a great deal to do with all of the other circumstances. We have some groups where we have many more recent immigrants, for example, who've come. Others where those who have come newly are more likely
Trustee
to have
Scott, you are over time,
have
so
come
can
from
you wrap up, please?
war-torn experience. So how do we start asking better questions?
Thank you, through you, Chair. You're absolutely right that the intersectionalities of these identities are a key piece, and that students cross multiple categories. Where we do find that this kind of analysis becomes really powerful is at the school level with principals and being able to better understand their school level data and seeing what kind of intersections happen there. We do provide school principals with dashboards that allow them to see the intersections of some of those pieces of identity. It does suppress the data when it gets to low numbers under 10 so that students' identities are protected. So we have more success in some areas than others. I do want to mention your point about socioeconomic status and that being something that we are looking at how we calculate and use that kind of data for students. We calculate a student's socioeconomics based on a proxy using student postal code, information we get from Statistics Canada for incomes of families with school-aged children. But we recognize that it's not perfect. It's an indicator that helps us gather some data, but in having conversations with other districts and about ways that we could refine our practice and better understanding socioeconomic status, some of the best practices are from districts who are actually able to use incomes of students who attend the school that's in their community. Because part of our challenge with looking at socioeconomic status is that it is based on postal code, and we have students from all over the city going to all kinds of different schools. And so thinking ahead, if the elementary program review is approved with the current model and students are attending schools in their neighborhoods, already planning about how we can refine our practice to get more precise around that economic status piece. And I will acknowledge this is the first year that we have reported out on religion, and in part because we know there's real value when we get to the well-being and sense of belonging data that we're going to be bringing forward in March. And while maybe we don't see big differences by religion in terms of the academic achievement, and as you said, there's overlap with other things, we do think that when we get to some of those areas and are able to bring that analysis forward, you'll see how that's impacting the work that's being done and how those strategies are being refined.
Trustee Scott, would you like to be added to the
I
second
would like
time
to be back
speakers?
on the list.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. Continuing down my first time speakers list, Trustee Forte.
Through you, Chair. Superintendent Major, you made a really great comment about a particular teacher and how their confidence in their student boosted that student's confidence, self-confidence in math. I'm just curious because in the report provided in Appendix C, grade 3 students respond that they like math, 72% of grade 3 students. That number drops significantly for grade 6 and grade 9. What are we doing to help our older learners so that they have those same numbers as grade 3 students?
Thank you very much, Trustee, for the question. We do tend to notice that in terms of student mindset, there often is a dip as students engage in more challenging work. Anxiety around math sometimes persists, and we sometimes do see a difference in regards to student confidence. We think about the work that we're currently doing right now and what students are telling us in terms of how it is impacting on them. The ability for students to be able to connect with their peers and engage in math conversations helps them develop confidence in their abilities as mathematicians. They have opportunities to practice in safe spaces. I was in a class the other day where a teacher was asking a series of questions to the students. And I was noticing how only certain students were putting their hands up. And I thought about what could lead to that. I followed up in another class where the teacher would ask a question and say, I want you to turn to your elbow partner and just have a quick chat about X, Y, and Z. Then the students were asked, share your thinking. I saw an increased number of students raising their hands. So I think about the kinds of spaces that we are working with educators on creating, which spaces that make students feel comfortable, make students feel that they want to take a risk and that it's a safe risk for them to take, where students want to persist at challenging tasks. And so creating those conditions to support student success is part of what's making the difference around building student confidence. I think additionally, relevance matters with students. When we are thinking about and tapping and leveraging student prior knowledge, when we are creating spaces where tasks reflect the lived experiences and cultural realities of students, we're seeing a difference. Superintendent Riddell talked about the work that's happening in regards to literacy and talking about those experiential opportunities. Those experiences, I think, support students in building the confidence to feel like they're mathematicians, and that's where we're going to see a difference. I'm wondering if Principal Massey here could speak a little bit about some of the mindset data that we've collected from grade 9 students.
Thank you, Superintendent Major, and thank you for the question through you, Madam Chair. I want to start with a quote from a teacher. I've seen a real difference in my students' engagement since I started using more hands-on activities and group work. They're asking more questions and seem to be enjoying math more. Quotes from students, this is fun. The manipulatives help me understand. And I think one of the big changes that we're really focusing on this year, because we are aware of a trend that is decades old. Students start out liking math provincially, nationally, and in the OCDSB. And then as time moves on, they don't like math so much. And so we've been through the OCDSB numeracy assessment tool. It's called the ONAT. It focuses on grade 3 and grade 6 understanding of number sense, which is foundational to understanding math. We are focusing on number sense because when students are frustrated, then they will find things more challenging. It's not productive struggle, it is frustration, and it's not learning. And so the data is telling us that in our elementary classrooms, number sense is the area we need to focus on. And in secondary, we need to be focusing on algebraic thinking, which builds on number sense. And so what we've seen this year from our initial mindset surveys in grade 3, 6, and 9 is a growth in our students' confidence in their ability, because you have to hold math in your hands before you can hold it in your head. And to circle back to our director's initial comments about focusing on high impact instructional practices, tools and representations is a high impact instructional practice. And so that is something that we have chosen as a district to focus on. And when we talk to students in our schools, it is super encouraging to see that they're actually talking about the manipulatives, helping them understand the abstract. And we believe, and we have evidence, and we have quotes from students saying, because I can hold math in my hands, I can now hold it in my head, and I understand. And the difference being is, we're not just doing that in our primary divisions, we're doing that in our intermediate, in our junior, and in our senior classes as well. We have students in grade 12 that are using manipulatives, just like in post-secondary mathematics classrooms. And so our data is suggesting that that is leading to a greater confidence in mathematics.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Forte. Just so everyone knows, we still have approximately 7 people on the first-time speakers list. We're going to do Student Trustee Sharanya and then Student Trustee Jeffrey, and then we're going to take a break.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm actually not sure who can answer this question, but my question has to do with how these current initiatives are being communicated to students. When the student trustees presented the Math Achievement Action Plan to the Student Senate a few months ago, they expressed a lot of feelings of disconnect with this introduction, because they weren't aware that it even existed, or similar efforts were being designed for them, like SAIL for our ESL learners or the other experiential learning opportunities. So I was wondering if there are any specific actions being taken to bridge this gap, whether it's through principals and educators or directly to students in our secondary student support, so that we can improve their confidence.
I think I'll jump in to start, open for anyone else to jump in as well. I think it's a really good point. As you were saying some things, I went, oh yeah. So it is a really good point. I think, you know, in terms of some of these initiatives, I'm thinking programs like SAIL, which is a summer program. Those are pieces that we are working to get better at making sure we communicate through the student communication channels that we have through our communications departments, as well as through the various social media pieces that we do access as well. I'll be honest, I would have to go back and do some more thinking about which pieces and how to communicate them best. The communication pieces, I think it's fair to say one of the challenges that we deal with the most. I know myself, it's something that I'm always thinking about and can forget about from time to time. So it's a good point to bring up for us to take a look at how we make sure these pieces are aware. We have a lot going on. How do we make sure that it goes out succinctly to the right people? So thank you for that.
All right, thank you very much. Student Trustee Jeffrey.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, obviously, you know, it's definitely super important to make sure that we're addressing all these discrepancies in achievement for certain groups, such as multilingual learners or Indigenous students who might not be achieving at the provincial standard for certain reasons. But also, I mean, looking at the other side of the data, for example, in Appendix C, especially, for example, for groups like East Asians, which I'm going to talk about, there are certain groups that are achieving sort of beyond the provincial standard or hitting the provincial standard at exceptionally high levels. For example, I mean, for EQO grade 3, East Asian students, 86 for 66 for mathematics, 85 versus 74, 79 versus 65. And, you know, the story sort of follows through on all those assessments. So, you know, I think it's really important that students have the opportunity, every student has the opportunity to challenge themselves and to expand on their learning every day at school. So how is the board sort of working to make sure that students like these can be constantly challenged and, you know, they might benefit from certain programs or professional development for teachers or extended sort of extensions on curriculums? So yeah, what work can be done and what work should be done to make sure that these students can be encouraged to, fulfill their potentials and to go as far as possible in their learning.
Perhaps I'll start and then I'll turn it over to staff. A couple of the real foundational pieces that were mentioned previously, there were two, and I'm going to add a third to answer your question, Student Trustee Jeffrey. Culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy and universal design for learning are underpinnings of the work we're doing. The other one that I would add to that is differentiated instruction, where the nature of a task, rather than having 17 different tasks in a classroom to meet the diverse learning needs in our rooms, the nature of the task being rich enough, open enough for entry levels, regardless of where the student is at, I think is the key to some of that work, so that a student who might only just be accessing that particular concept has a way in to move their learning forward, and a student who really has mastered that skill or really understands the concept can take it to a new level that links to their passions or interests or readiness for the next step. So I think you raise a really good point, regardless of where our students are. And I don't see any hundreds here, right? I don't see any mastery, full mastery. We've got area of growth for any student. So I think differentiated instruction, whether it's the nature of the task, the readiness level, the profile of the learner, the interests, is a way that we can do what you're saying for all students, not only those who might not be meeting the standard, but for those who are and need to excel further in their learning. So I think it's a really valid point you're raising.
Is there additional comments from staff on the other side of the table?
I think I would agree with everything the director shared in there as well. And I'm going to offer two more thoughts and then loop back to the communication one because my brain kicked in after I shut my mic off. There are a few other technical pieces in terms of continuing to provide challenge for students as well, in terms of various competitions that happen. That can be done through extracurricular as well as courses. We offer AP programming in a lot of our schools as well. And although those are specific courses, the instruction and learning that's engaged in AP also then I'm going to say leaks into other class areas as well in terms of raising those expectations. And when I think of all the work that was done through de-streaming that Principal Massey has led over the last number of years, it's all about setting that high expectation. And as the director was saying, very much personalizing, differentiating to meet the students' needs in those ways as well. And looping back quickly just on the communication pieces as well. We do share an awful lot of information with our guidance departments, our student success teachers that do share information out that way. Lead teachers in certain areas, so co-op teachers, apprenticeship, SHISM teachers, math teachers, if there are specific pieces or specific initiatives happening, we will often send things out through them as well. So we do try to get the communication pieces out. We also have in our district a number of graduation coaches. We have Black graduation coaches, Indigenous graduation coaches. We have student support coordinators as well that also have this information and will bring it to students, because we recognize that posting it on the bulletin board or even putting it on a piece of, on any aspect of social media, it doesn't necessarily reach everybody. So a couple of more pieces for you.
And if I may just jump in, those are incredible questions through you, Madam Chair. Thank you to both of you for bringing those forward. Just a couple of comments to follow up on Superintendent Laverne and Director Buffoni. Our curriculum right now is incredibly strong. And I've spoken at this table before with praises for the Ontario curriculum, particularly in mathematics and in languages, in terms of acquisition of languages. It speaks of a continuum, and we're moving away from, in a classroom, for example, if you get a concept, you get an idea, then perhaps in the past, certainly for me, it was, well, not that I got many opportunities like this, but it was harder work, right? Or do this extra worksheet, or do this or do that. What we're now talking about, and these continuums of curriculum in mathematics and languages, are creating entry points for all students and extendability for all students. So these curriculums are open in such a way that they create opportunities for all students to engage in the overall expectations, engage in the expectations, and an opportunity for all students to really push their thinking forward, not just piling on more work, but really push their thinking forward. And so that's a change in mindset for us. And you asked a question about the Math Achievement Action Plan. It focuses on three things: fidelity of the curriculum, which is centering in on what the curriculum is actually asking staff and teachers to focus on and students to learn, on increasing content knowledge for teaching staff and principals so that they can recognize the gifts that students bring forward around mathematics or other areas that might be different from the way they learned math. And so they understand and have entry into that conversation, and then getting to know the learner. I think we'll all recognize those special teachers that knew our learning style and were able to create learning environments, as Superintendent Major has said, where we felt as though we belonged, and those teachers pushed our thinking. That is what we're really focusing on and changing our mindset towards. Thank you for the questions.
Great, thank you. And if there's no other questions, student trustee? Oh, sorry, additional comments? Please go ahead, staff.
Those are excellent, excellent questions that you asked. And I'm going to go back to the question just briefly that you asked, a way that all students, and I understand that involves student safety in the classroom and sense of belonging and the like, but you can ask any one of your teachers for different initiatives that take place. Your principal will go to system days where they learn a number of different things that the district is facilitating for them to engage in. Certainly asking your teacher about experiential opportunities or summer programming and the like, they have that information. For students to be more engaged, ideally co-creating criteria for different learning tasks that you're doing in the class and the like. And to your question about in terms of high expectations for everyone, but certainly increasing high expectations, and certainly with a district framework for AI that will be coming out at some point, but looking at the different functionality of certain things like ChatGPT and the engagement of ways that you can ask questions and give prompts in the conversation back and forth that you can have. I know it's a computer, but it's actually quite fascinating as how deep you can go with learning in that regard.
All right, thank you, everyone. And I'm not seeing additional questions, so I am going to call a break just for everyone's awareness. The speakers list after the break for first-time speakers is Anthony, then Brent, then Stephanie, then Tanhir, and then Stephen. And then currently on second-time speakers list, we have Trustee Lyra, Trustee Kaplan, Mirth, Trustee Dixon, and then Trustee Scott. I'm going to ask if everyone can please be back in their seats by 9:10. All right, everyone, I'm going to call the meeting back to order. All right, so we're going to continue down our first time speakers list. So Anthony, please go ahead.
Through you, the chair. Touching base with the concerns raised by Trustee Kaplan Mirth about regarding the the things raised, and also Trustee Evans for reaching the goals, and the director about simplifying things strategically. My concerns were about being able to in the context of all the innovations and good work done throughout getting them achieved through at all the different stages in the context of in the context of financially tight resources and time, quality, and also get me if I'm wrong, is that the question is students, the early years, grade 1, 2, and kindergarten, and even say pre-kindergarten, those formative years are the scholarly and medical research even would say that those are critical for putting a lot of the resources into that to make sure that that innovation is and resources are put into that. Am I not right on that point?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think, Anthony, you're absolutely correct. To the ability to get upstream, so to speak, as effectively and efficiently as we can in early literacy and in early numeracy are critical.
My thoughts on that is that if we put we have all those a lot of the good past many presentations on the past on good work done for the other years, and I'm not saying that we should put any less emphasis on those, but if we put a lot of emphasis on those early years learning and to be able to build on that and to be able to put that there, and that would allow to allow a cohort year after year, starting from the kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, build and measure that and move onwards, and year after year that they would build upon that. If I'm not correct, if I'm correct, I mean. To build and that would have the other students build upon.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I think, Anthony, you raise a really good point. The only caution is that our cohorts don't stay stable year to year. It's one thing if we started in kindergarten with a group of students and we knew that was our group and there wasn't any transiency in and out. For instance, a number of our multilingual learners don't come in kindergarten; they might come in grade 4, that kind of thing. So there is an ability to sort of follow a group of students, but there are some variations within it, and therefore, year to year, the nature of the supports we have to put in place change. And we see that in our staffing every year. Students change schools. So I think in principle, you raise a great point around cohort tracking over time. No question. I think some of the work we've done and that the province has done is address that. But it's not an absolute. There are variables that impact our ability to do that and to be consistent in that way.
Yes, understood. I'm thinking yes, and then there's putting resources in for those particular groups too, but having that particular strong cohort, whether it be that consistency 60% or 80% that goes through, and it would help those incoming cohorts having that resource, if I'm not correct. And I'd like to be added on a second round for the speakers.
All right, thank you, Anthony. I will hand it to staff if there's additional comments that they would like to provide, but I can see lots of nodding heads, and thank you for the comments, and I'm adding you to second time speakers list. If anyone would like to speak before I continue, please go ahead.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, I just looked to our General Manager Rahim around analysis of cohorts or any commentary there, if you don't mind.
We do some cohort tracking, but in particular at the school level. So when we share back information with school principals, whether it's summaries of report card data or EQAO data, we do tracking of the earlier years for those particular students. Now, we don't always track back as far as kindergarten, although as we're currently working our way through the literacy screeners, especially around Acadians, that's really valuable data that we're getting into the hands of educators to inform instructional strategies at those formative years, as you mentioned.
All right, thank you very much. And Anthony, you're added back onto the second time speakers list. So I'm going down my first time speakers list, and Brent, you're next on my list.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, I really appreciate it. It's always bothered me a little bit that schools get defined by one data point in EQAO. And I'm really happy that this discussion tonight has broadened that scope a little bit. Having been out of school for 5 years and having been back in for a full year, I've got a kind of a neat perspective on things. And I think there's a couple signs of hope for me that I kind of want to share from the principal's perspective. A couple of these things are new that I've benefited from at the school, but a couple have been around for a long time and have just been refined in a really, I think, a very positive way. We've benefited at Bayshore from the Student Achievement Through Equity program tremendously. The inquiry that we're doing right now in writing is showing real results in the classroom on a week-to-week basis that I could share. We're still seeing the benefits of a kindergarten readiness program from a year before I got there. That year 2 cohort is still seeing and reaping the benefits of that program through the Student Achievement and Equity program. And our parents this year, we're running 2 rounds of a 10-week literacy program for parents aimed at phonemic awareness and aimed at our youngest learners. So I can't speak enough to the Student Achievement Through Equity group. The other is the RIT program, the Reading Intervention Teacher program. We are also benefiting from the tremendous math numeracy coach support, but the RIT support there. Those reading intervention teachers work directly with students, and they also work directly with staff. It's like having a great co-thinking partner for 6 weeks, and that's been a tremendous difference. The other piece I'll just remark on briefly is the professional development. I don't think we've ever been supported, or it's been a long time. I've been around since 2005. My gray beard shows that I've been around a little bit of time, but I don't think the professional development that we've been offered as principals and as teachers has been as aligned and responsive to district need as it has been now. We have central meetings, and I know there's a lot of competing, operational constraints around principals' times at these meetings, but professional development around pedagogy and instructional practice has been prioritized in a way that I think if we didn't continue to offer it, I think that we'd get a lot of pushback from principals because it's become a part of the culture of what we do. So just wanted to throw those kudos out. That is a definite change, and it's something that has changed, and I do think it is a sign of hope that the culture of our institution has really focused back on instruction, which is a great thing. So just a couple signs of hope. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And I'm seeing lots of nodding heads around the table, so thank you for the comments. Continuing down my speakers list, Stephanie, if you're still online. I'm going to do a last call for Stephanie. I am thinking she might not be online anymore, so Stephen, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to, I'm happy to hear about I'm happy to hear well-being mentioned by the director, and I'm happy to hear about the authentic and relevant learning that's happening. I've heard that from Superintendent Major and others. We need to be, as the student trustees mentioned, we need to be listening. We need to be articulating to our students what we're looking for, and they need to be heard around, what they're looking for and what their learning needs are. Before you can truly, I think we can all agree, before you can truly experience academic success, you have to have your basic needs met. Access to healthy food and safety. I'm reminded of driving through Bell's Corners, I think it was over a week ago, and seeing families emerging from the Days Inn Hotel. The kids with their backpacks on, their winter coats on, off to school from their one room with their siblings, probably families of 5 or 6. And they go off to school, and it's, it's a huge challenge for them, number one, but it's a huge challenge for the teachers that are supporting them. And I can tell you right now that the teachers that I represent are not thinking about screeners. They're thinking about building belonging, helping their students make friends, ensuring these children are reflected in the classroom and the school. And I think we always have to be reminded of that. So I hope we aren't saying that these screening tools are better at determining learning strategies than the work the educators do. You know, as we speak, any multilingual and itinerant teachers are being pulled from their work to go and do more screening, and screening students that have already passed the screener earlier in the year. And I think we all can agree the system is stretched, and that because the needs are so immense. So can we really afford to do this? I hope that this idea that teachers in our district should just screen their students as much as possible. And these screeners will tell us exactly what strategies we need to employ in the classroom, and not trusting the professionals on the ground each and every day who do multiple assessments. And I would say that you know, when teachers are provided with those optimal learning environments, like, you know, class size and composition and needs, they're the professionals that truly bring humanity to the learning process that no screener can do. Human connections are so important for our students. Our students are overwhelmed with technology, as we know, and are missing out on positive human interactions. So are we saying that the use of tools will mean status quo for the investments in creating these learning spaces we need? What we're seeing right now is rising rates of violence and disruptive behaviors in our classrooms. And the reality in many classrooms is results in traumatized students and educators and growing gaps in learning. So are we becoming obsessed with these tools? I hope we don't look for quick fixes,
Stephen,
because there are no quick fixes.
I am sorry, you are over time.
Yeah,
I'm happy
okay.
to add you back to the second time speakers
Thank you
list,
so
but
much.
I know the director would like to respond.
Really appreciate Stephen's comments here. I think we've got to keep the perspective that is being mentioned. I think there's value there. Our screeners can't be the be all end all. They're just one piece of information, much like the provincial assessment data. We'll do our best to keep that in check. Nothing replaces the value of the educators in front of the students in the classroom, and the research states, as Stephen's mentioned, that that's the #1 influence on our kids. So really appreciate the comment, really appreciate the perspective raised. We won't look to overdo it, but we do feel we're in a period where this screening will help us set the gauge for how we provide some supports. But I understand the comments made, and I think they're of value.
All right, we are now moving on to second time speakers list. So we'll start with trustee Lara, then trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thanks. So I've noted that girls are scoring less well than boys in maths. And I'm wondering what we can do to ensure that girls are getting access to the same paths.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll start and then pass it on to staff, just to make sure I understand the question. Just access to paths, say STEM oriented or something of that nature, is that the, and I'll look to staff for any commentary from a student success perspective on, I gather you're saying sort of post their exit from us.
Yeah,
Okay.
post
the experience
post-secondary
here.
school, I'm
Got
looking
it.
for people I'm looking to get an understanding of how are we going to ensure that the girls who graduate from our system are able to succeed and are going into STEM fields in university or college.
Yeah, there's some great initiatives on that front. I'll turn it over to staff for greater detail than I'll have.
Thanks for that question. And through you, Madam Chair, we have a number of different initiatives designed to do those pieces. We offer a dual credit program, which allows students while they're still in high school to experience a college course. So they actually go to Algonquin, they experience the course. They earn a credit through Algonquin, which then transfers if they choose to, and they earn their high school credit at the same time. We were the second district in Canada to offer a school within university program. We partnered with Carleton University last year to offer some opportunities for students to engage in different course learning. again, earning a university credit and a high school credit at the same time. This year, we expanded that to include St. Paul's University as well. So we've increased the number of opportunities that are there. And our Pathways team works extensively throughout the year to provide a series of awareness and engagement opportunities for students. So they will connect them with various trade unions. The students will go and have a learning experience there, or spend quite a bit of time actually there, engaged in different learning experiences. There are also various pathway events throughout the year. So, for example, at the EY Center, there's often a series of trades there that students will go and get to experience what some of that work looks like, and start to, I always say, toe dip into whether this is something they wish to explore. We've also been expanding our co-op and apprenticeship programs in that way as well. We also did a significant investment last year when the ministry mandated grade 9 technology credit for all students. We did a significant investment to broaden technology and modern technological courses in the district to increase the experience that students were having there as well.
So I appreciate everything you just said, but you didn't say the word girls. And my question was specifically, what are we doing to ensure that girls are getting into the same kinds of programs? Because having a program that offers a university credit, if it's not being uptaken by girls, then it's a program that's not helping the girls in STEM disparities that we see. And so is there something you can specifically point to that we're doing to ensure that girls leaving our system are able to get into STEM programs and are able to succeed in what are some of the more high-paying, lucrative jobs in society?
Certainly, in the last few years, we've actually offered girls-specific events for students, for female students, to go and hear from people in industry and experience some of that work as well. Often, the people they're engaging with through these experiences that have been set up for them are also women that are in that line of work already, and we usually do 1 or 2 of those in a year, specifically on that to that point.
Okay. My other question is about the reading and writing scores of boys, which are notably lower than the reading and writing scores of girls. And we're seeing fewer and fewer boys enter the non-STEM subjects in university. And I'm wondering if we have any effort or work being done to make sure that boys still see non-STEM university programs as viable post-secondary alternatives.
Our Pathways team is doing a lot of work to diversify the different types of experiences that students can have. And their voice, the student's voice, is very important. What they're interested in, where their passions lie, is very central to that work. So we have been very much focused on drawing in students' voice so that they are driving their path as they head to post-secondary.
I guess I am worried that this is an early indication of a growing trend. And I'm wondering if we have a plan to sort of reverse that trend, because I view it as generally not positive to see large segments of the population not challenge themselves at university or not attempt university. And we are seeing precipitous enrollment of boys in university or men in university. And so I just want to make sure that we are forward thinking when it comes to what this data might be indicating towards the future. That was all.
I'll be very, very quick on this one. I would suggest that as a district, we're actually quite innovative and quite far ahead on those pieces. Our Pathways team has worked in the last number of years to really diversify the number of ways that students can engage in their learning, can demonstrate their learning, and to really make sure that their learning is driven by where they want to go. Again, we have expanded our dual credit with Algonquin. We're growing our dual credit with the 2 universities. And I know the team as well is looking at something that we're calling a Pathways Sampler, and we're still working out the logistics. This will be something that we're planning for next year, where students who are uncertain where their pathway is going to go get to try out a bunch of different opportunities, earning credits on the way, so that they know that those opportunities are available to them.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Trustee Lyra and I are on the same wavelength tonight. My question is around systemic issues with gender gaps as well. But I want to focus not on pathways, but on looking at our achievement scores in math. We know that boys are outperforming girls in math across Ontario, but in Ottawa, if we look at our own data, that gender gap has widened over time. It has not improved. In our 2015 report, which also actually looked at cohorts, we reported that our male students achieved at higher levels in both the applied and academic level math, and there was a 1% to an 8% gap. We've now got a 9% gap in terms of how girls are performing compared to boys in math. And we also know that there's statistically significantly more likely boys than girls to say that they have positive attitudes towards math. So if we go back to the examples that we used for other systemic discrimination and ensuring that students feel supported and that they thrive in environments, why are we leaving girls behind when it comes to math? What are we doing, and how are we going to know that that makes a difference?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Major for just a comment on the gender aspect of mathematics and numeracy more broadly.
Thanks so much for the question, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. That certainly is an important piece around the gender divide. As we have indicated earlier, our work in regards to culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy has been a critical focus in terms of really helping us understand who the learners are and what they bring to the table. That includes, of course, our both girls and our boys, and creating those conditions to support success of both girls and boys is part of the work that we are doing in our schools. We haven't had an opportunity to dive deep in terms of specifically looking at the data regarding achievement of girls or achievement of boys, but it's certainly something that we can take back and do some deeper dive into.
Thank you. There are, like, you can do a very quick literature review. There's a 2012 article written by a University of Ottawa professor on gender issues in math, looking at EQAO disparities between boys and girls. There's a report from 2021, which ties to what Trustee Lara was saying, that women are 29% less likely than men to enroll in post-secondary STEM programs. That starts with girls in grade 3 believing that they can't do math. It extends to girls in grade 9 believing that math is hard. We are not equipping, we're talking about 50% of our population that we are not addressing, and there's so much data. Over the last 25 years, that gap has widened rather than narrowing. So I don't think that the problem is that we don't have enough data, that the issue is that we're not actually addressing what's going on in classrooms that continues to create the belief amongst girls that they can't succeed in math. And similarly, that boys can't succeed in literacy.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think Trustee Kaplan-Murth raises some really good points. You know, Assistant Principal Massey often speaks about mathitudes, sort of the attitudes around mathematics that our students have, our staff have, and I would say that society has in terms of gender. This is part of Superintendent Major and Superintendent Laverne have spoken to this evening of the work in progress for us as a district, making sure we have opportunities that are really encouraging of all of our students and their identity, whether it's gender identity or other, to make sure that we create the culture, as was shared earlier, that breaks down some of those traditional trends, whether they're up 1% or down 1%, they're still there. And I think Trustee Kaplan-Murth makes the point, even with an article of over a decade ago, that speaks to the very item that she's addressing. So that is part of our work in progress, part of our frameworks moving forward to make sure we've got classrooms that are as conducive to learning regardless of the student's background or identity or, quite frankly, interests. Our students should be able to explore whatever career path is driven by their passion. So I appreciate the comment, and it remains work for us.
Thank you. I have one other question, which actually ties back to something that Stephen was saying in terms of dysregulated students and violence in classrooms. I think that it would probably be helpful when we're looking at data in terms of academic achievement, if we're also gathering data at the same time that we can look at in the same reports on what is happening in terms of disruption in classrooms, because surely that is affecting our ability to meet provincial standards.
I'll just ask if it's possible to make a comment for General Manager Rahim around some of the work that ties to our school climate survey, that kind of thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's the balance between integrating that data into this report and, as I mentioned at the beginning, breaking things into manageable chunks to try to have deep conversations. One of the things that I like about the framework that's outset from the ministry with the 3 different SAP pillars being learning, well-being, and engagement, and then preparing students for the future is that ideally we aren't looking at these reports in isolation. So when we do bring the well-being and engagement report in March, you'll notice the tables look almost identical. It'll be the same groups of students disaggregated by the same sets of data. So for example, in EQAO, one of the questions is awareness of mental health supports. And when we're looking at attendance, that's coming from other pieces of data. So it's the same data sets. So you'll be able to lay the tables side by side, even though we're not necessarily bringing them to the same meeting, they will align and integrate with each other.
All right, thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. If you'd like to go on third time speakers list, please feel free to raise your hand. Going down the second time speakers list, Trustee Dixon and then Trustee Scott. Trustee Dixon.
My question was asked before by student trustee Jeff, so I won't go on the list. I'll take myself off. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Trustee Dixon. Trustee Scott.
Thank you. I'd just like to come back to the issue of whether we're actually asking the right questions. Because what I'm hearing is that where the improvements in achievement are being seen and being tracked is mostly in the classroom at the school level. And we have to look at the district level. But given the board's interest in making sure that we are being conscious of individual differences, that we are being conscious of the need to have equity across the system, I guess I'm wondering still if we are actually looking at the right pieces of the data, or whether, I mean, we focused a lot on the identity-based data, and it has been very helpful in some respects, but I'm still not sure if it is actually helping us figure out where the supports need to go at what level, because too many of the groups within themselves, whichever box you pick in terms of the identity, are diverse because of the intersectionality. And I'm just trying to figure out, is there a better way to look at this?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. It's an excellent question. And for us, part of the challenge is striking the balance between full transparency and accountability and our requirement from the ministry to report out on those disproportionality indices of the disaggregated data. And so when you get to those tables at the end, it's having it there for transparency and accountability, but as you've acknowledged, not necessarily sometimes the most meaningful questions to be asking at the classroom level. And that is why we sort of strike the balance between providing dashboards and disaggregation to school principals. And as Dr. Laverne mentioned earlier, when schools are doing their school priority learning plans, they work with data support leads, they work with some of the tables that we provide with them to identify a target group of students. And it also ties back to Trustee Lyra's comments earlier about what we project to see for future change, and why my answer is that needle moves slow and steady, because for me, the interest is about reducing those disproportionalities, and that happens at the school level based on who their population of students is. So I appreciate the question, and that when we roll it up at the district level, sometimes you lose the richness of the data. So trying to strike that balance between what it looks like when we get really specific and what it looks like when we roll up at the district.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. Continuing down my second time speakers list, I have Anthony and then Stephen. Anthony, please go ahead.
Through you, the chair. Touching base, first of all, with Trustee Evans' recent comments about the STEM, being very pragmatic there, because I've worked with the Senate boards with, say, for example, McGill and therefore on equity, and it really touches base in even of Queens. And my experience also with the federal government, working in one of the largest services that have work with engineering, is that you have we've made great progress for women in almost all fields, even law, which was a challenge 20 years ago, a great challenge of equity, and we've made progress great. But engineering is the one bastion there that is still a great weak point to this day, to my knowledge. And so there's, going back to Trustee Evans' concern there, it is a very real concern. And I despite those great intentions, great work there for visiting programs with the different colleges and other initiatives, I do believe there's a need, and this goes back to my own experience taking, despite being in administration, I worked with students in engineering at university when I was a student, is that there's a need for bringing in students to the school. And I think what you think of this is right down to grade 9, grade 10, and even down to the elementary school, bringing in university students and even professionals to grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12 at those different stages, and having them work with the students, do practical things, and show them as guides for what potential careers. We're not just talking about really concrete things like physics or chemistry careers, but even industrial engineers, systems engineers, bringing women and men that provide for women, girls, a positive, gender positive experience. So I don't know what you think about that, as this is being and they're not just, we're not just, even lawyers bringing in, and they could talk about engineering, how progress has been made. So these are very pragmatic examples.
Absolutely, Anthony, through you, Madam Chair. I think they're great points. I think some of the work done in student success does that in terms of bringing in through World of Work and other career-related opportunities for guest speakers, whether they're already in the profession or they're aspiring to be at the post-secondary level. I think they're excellent comments. It's work that a district is doing and needs to continue to do, much in the spirit of the comments that have been made around the table. I agree.
Because I underline this because there's just so few women in the engineering field, and there's just right now when I hear it's still the case, like, and we have the problem with right now is with social media. It just self-reinforces itself, and with the algorithm and the program algorithms and the self-reinforcing algorithms out there, we have work to do. If there's a third speakers list, I would like to get back on for other things also.
All right, thank you, Anthony. I can see lots of nodding heads and the comments are greatly appreciated. We're going to continue down our second time speakers list. So Stephen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I just want to say that my daughter is thinking about biomed next year, first year university. So we're really excited because we haven't had a lot of science people in my family. So that she's going against the curve, and that's always a good thing. I just want to emphasize again, informal assessments and evaluations are happening all the time in classrooms, done by professionals, and I think it should never be undervalued. It's so important. And again, I just emphasize that human connection piece, that nurturing feelings of safety and belonging, so important. And I'm happy to hear about that idea of bringing that data together so we see it. The investments in that I see that are important as well, I think we can see it in the data, certainly around violence, is social workers being available, special education, more special education teachers and multilingual itinerant teachers and EAs and so on. Those are the things that are going to make the huge difference in our system, along with all of the other data collecting tools and so on. I would emphasize the human beings in the system, and then those tools as maybe even a distant second. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Stephen. I am seeing no additional hands. I will remind folks this is one of 3 updates, so you can always send staff any additional comments or questions before the next update comes before us. And thank you very much, staff. I know that was a lot of questions to handle all at once. We appreciate you as always. So continuing on, I am going to move on to items for information. I'm going to call upon Trustee Scott or Jenkins to provide an OPSPA update. Trustee Scott?
I do have not exactly an update, but certainly something trustees should know about. Susan Humphreys, who's still president of the Eastern Region Group of Public Boards, is looking for a trustee interested in serving on behalf of Eastern Region on the OPSPA committee for the selection of the OPSPA awards. So if any of you are interested in putting your name forward for that, it's one person for the whole Eastern Region, and I have no idea how many people will put their names forward, but let me know by the 20th of February, please. Second thing is she is also seeking a representative from each board in Eastern Region on the selection committee for the Healthy Democracy Student Leadership Award. And again, if you're interested in serving on that committee on behalf of the OCDSB, please let me know by the 20th of February. If there's only one person interested, that person can just go ahead and be appointed. But if there's more than one, we can make an appointment at the board meeting on the 25th of February if necessary. That particular committee will probably meet 1 or 2 times via Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And not for a while, because I don't think the application deadline for the students applying for that award, I think it's in early June. So that'll be something that happens in busy June, probably.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. And just to confirm, Trustee Jenkins, no update. I do have a speakers list started, so Trustee Lara.
Thanks. The OPSPA awards are nominated by trustees for students in the Eastern Region. Must they be grade 12 students, or is it any student who is eligible for the nominations for the awards?
I don't have the details for all of the awards. All of that information is available to you on the OPSPA website.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lara. Moving on, I'm looking to Trustee Lee to provide an OSTA update. And I am seeing a shaking head saying no. So are there any questions for our OSTA representatives? Trustee Jenkins?
Thank you, Chair. I received an email recently from the general manager for OSTA sharing that a change in the bell times. Is there going to be any other changes to for any other schools? Do parents need to know?
That information will be communicated directly by the principal of the affected schools. The timelines is that they have to be reported to any of these schools that are affected by a 10-minute bell time change basically within this month. So if there's any others that are coming to any other school, they will be communicated with the appropriate school communities through their principal.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lee and Trustee Jenkins. I am seeing no other hands. Is there any items of new business this evening? Trustee Lara?
Thank you. I have received increased attention around some of the comments made by the chair of the police. I was wondering if we could get some clarity from the director around how our practices or policies have evolved given the nature of the police chief's comments.
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the question from Trustee Lyra. As the Board of Trustees is aware, the Ottawa Police Service has coordinated a community youth unit. That is the model by which the police will be engaging with the 4 local school boards. Essentially, of course, the work for our district remains in place, honoring the motion that we have in place. We work day in and day out with Ottawa Police to address some of the issues that happen within school, but honoring the spirit of the motion that we have in place. So although the Ottawa Police Service has a new model that they've put forward, we continue to engage with the police based in respecting that new model, but also honoring our motion and our direction in place as a district. I'll turn it over to Associate Director Reynolds for any additional comment in case I'm mistaken, or if there's other clarity that would be helpful.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Really not much to add, just to echo what the Director said. How and why and for what we call the Ottawa Police Service has not changed. Just in some instances, it's the who or the phone number that we use, but really we're still engaging in all the same ways that we were prior to any changes made by the Ottawa Police Service.
Thank you for the clarity.
Continuing down my speakers list, I have Trustee Jenkins and Trustee Kaplan-Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I should have asked this question during our discussion. I received a message from a number of families where I'm losing my voice, my apologies, where the EQAO marks for grade 9 were incorporated into their final assessment for math. Is that a standard assessment where you take the QAO grade 9 math into their final?
Through you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. That was a directive mandate from the Ministry of Education that effective this year, the grade 9 assessment of mathematics would count for anywhere between 10 and 30% of the students' final grade. We've been working very closely with schools to ensure that the best possible outcome for students is recognized in that final evaluation.
Great, thank you, Trustee Jenkins. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I received questions from the parents of Much More asking me about the proposal for the artificial turf shared between Much More and Corpus Christi. The issues that they raise is that it's contrary to our strategic plan, which includes environmental stewardship. They're also raising concerns about the health and safety, exposure to toxins in those plastics. And so they're asking whether we have a policy that we could develop, if we don't currently, specific to artificial turf use in our fields.
Through you, Chair, we don't have a specific policy on the use of artificial turfs. We normally do not use artificial turfs. We try to stick with environmentally friendly options like grass. There are areas within the district that artificial or regular grass just doesn't perform well enough for it to be a usable space. So the facilities department undertakes a variety of attempts to try different alternatives, and unfortunately, one of them would be artificial turf to ensure that we provide a proactive and safe play space for children to use in the schoolyard. So there is a couple of sites in the district, but it's very rare, and it's only on by an exception basis.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any other items of new business? Seeing none, I now declare this meeting adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.